Don't ever go to this address if called there. I remember hearing he radio buzzed to life as the voice of our sergeant fizzled through. Boys, we have a call of a break-in, address 47 Roadhouse Avenue. Call has been marked as urgent, get there as soon as possible. I placed the sandwich I was holding in the cup holder and bucked my seatbelt and waited for my partner, John, to buckle his. He nodded at me, and I stepped on the gas. The car roared as we sped forward, the blue, flashing lights reflecting on the pitch-dark dirt road in front of me. I didn't get along with John well, so our drives were usually next to silent. At first it was awkward, but now it's just the ordinary. I didn't mind. I just wanted to live to see the end of my shift and get home. I was a police officer in LA, the rough part, which meant I had a gun fired at me at least 3 times a week. Most people deal with crazy Karens. On the job, I deal with crazy gun-wielding crackheads. As we got closer and closer to the location, less and less cars were on the road. I found this to be strange. It's a Saturday night. Every household in Los Angeles is having a party. I shrugged it off. Maybe we were getting closer to a rural area. I didn't know. Come to think of it, I'd never been in that part of town before, but the address seemed so familiar. It's like hearing the name of a celebrity you're sure you've seen in a movie before. I was sure I'd heard this address in a case before. I just couldn't put my finger on it. The closer we got the house, the more static seeped through the radio. The music was barely recognizable by the time we pulled up front. Again, shrugged it off to be bad connection in this area and moved on. Looking at the house scared me. Something about it sent a shiver down my spine. It just seemed off. It didn't feel right. And the more I looked around, the more the dread crept out of the pit of my stomach and filled my entire body. There was cars, at least 100 of them, scattered around the house. Some relatively new, but one of them looked to be around 100 years old. They all looked like police cars. I wasn't sure. Maybe a team had gotten there before I did, but it just didn't make sense. Why would they be driving a 50-year-old car? I unzipped the pocket with my gun in it and stepped out of the car, making sure to be careful. I radioed that I had made it to the house and began to walk towards it. John followed behind me. I stopped to look at footprints, leading up to the window, and was suddenly knocked off my feet. I fell back and got up ready to scold John for being so clumsy, but then felt him pull me up from behind. I turned to look at him and he asked if I was okay. I just started at him in disbelief. He shrugged me off and continued walking to the house. He opened the door and stepped inside. I radioed him and told him I would secure the perimeter if he could check the inside and get whoever was in there out. He agreed, and I went on my way. After around 20 minutes, I made my way back to the front door and saw John getting out the car and walking towards the house. Puzzled, I watched him, wondering why he was in the car in the first place. He walked towards the house, focused on the front door, and then stopped and turned, looking at a patch of mud on the ground. To my horror, he walked over, acted like he was picking someone up, and then started at the emptiness in front of him, asking in the exact same tone, "Are you okay? How did you fall?" Before shrugging and walking into the house, I followed behind him, stopping at the front door equal sign, observing. His radio fizzled to life. My distorted voice came through, crackly and uncanny, telling him I would be securing outside if he could get whoever was in the house out. I was frozen. All I could do was stare. He began walking, and I followed him. He walked into the kitchen and looked around, calling out for anyone who might have been in there. Nothing. He then went into the living room. That's where the smell began. A horrible stench that filled the room. It smelled like mold and decay and death. Despite the smell, there was nothing in the living room. I followed him into the hall. I looked up the stairs. through the opening in the banister and froze. There was a mummified body. It looked to be 100 years old. Only thing left was bones and a loose 1920s-style dress molding, draped over the skeleton. I screamed and tried to grab John, but to my horror watched my arm go right through him. Unbothered by my screams, he continued to the bottom of the stairs and began walking up. I stood there, watching him, teary-eyed. He got to the top and screamed as he saw the sight I had just seen. I closed my eyes but had to open them when I heard the gurgling, the gasping. I look up and see him clutching his throat, deep red seeping down, covering his hands and uniform. He stumbled backwards, falling down the stairs. He hits the bottom with a loud thud and the noises stop. I try to run. I want to run, but my feet glue me to the spot. My body won't let me move. I watch as a shadow makes its way down the stairs, keeping its eye on John's lifeless body. It picks him up, dragging him towards a room. I run after it, screaming, yelling, but it's unbothered. It doesn't care. It can't hear me. I follow behind, watching like a predator hunting its unsuspecting prey. It opened the door, and I froze. I scanned the room it was entering and had to swallow the heap of vomit that rose up from my throat. In the room were around 100 dead bodies, all with police uniforms draped over them. Some were the exact same as I had on. Others looked to be 100-year-old, just like the cars outside. And that's when I saw it, one after the other. Police officers falling down the stairs, all with their throat slits. Some I recognized. Some I had worked with before they went missing. Other ones looked like they were alive during the Second World War. The figure dropped John's body and then closed the door. I ran as fast as I could out the house and slammed the door behind me. I stood on the front door, catching my breath. And that's when I saw it. John, stand up, get out the car, and begin walking towards the hose again. His throat healed. I watched him. And again, he stopped in the exact same spot as last time. Are you okay? How did you fall? I never thought I'd find myself in the middle of a story that would shake our quiet town of Pinebrook, nestled in the Rockies, to its core. Here I am, recounting the chilling events that unfolded and earned me the moniker the Pinebrook Phantom across social media platforms. It all began in the spring of 2020, a period that should have been marked by renewal, but instead was stained by a crime that I still struggle to understand why I committed. My name is Ethan Carter, and I was born in 1980 in the lush, serene town of Pinebrook, Colorado. I was a decent student, known for my diligence and ambition, yet troubled by a rebellious streak that led to several disciplinary issues during my high school years. At the age of 19, I found myself entangled in a relationship with a younger girl from my junior year, which quickly led to marriage and fatherhood, marking the beginning of a complex web of personal relationships that would define my life. My charm allowed me to juggle relationships with multiple women, never thinking much of the consequences. In 2002, I met Hannah Sullivan. She was unlike anyone I had ever known. Together, we spiraled into a world of dark desires and actions that horrified even me. Our tumultuous relationship was filled with abuse and manipulation, extending to Hannah's family and culminating in acts I can scarcely bring myself to speak of. After leaving my wife and moving in with Hannah in 2005, my behavior took a turn for the worse, plunging me into a cycle of psychological torment and violence that seemed to have no end. Driven by a twisted need for control and domination, I transformed the third floor of an abandoned building into a soundproof chamber where my darkest fantasies became a reality. I shocked my victims into submission, reveling in the power I wielded over them. My crimes weren't limited to physical violence. I engaged in elaborate schemes of fraud and extortion, amassing a small fortune at the expense of those who crossed my path. By 2012, Hannah and I were wanted for a series of crimes that shocked even the most seasoned law enforcement officers. We managed to evade capture, but our luck wouldn't last forever. In 2013, I deceived a woman into leaving her husband, claiming Hannah was merely my sister. Tragically, after one of her 3 children died, the remaining 2 were sent to live with their father, and the woman herself died under mysterious circumstances shortly after, leaving me with a considerable sum of money. My downfall came when I targeted a man named Jack Thornton and his daughter. Jack made the fatal mistake of trusting me, not knowing that it would lead to his and his daughter's capture and torture within my complex. The cruelty I inflicted upon them is something I can barely comprehend now, forced as they were to endure unspeakable acts of violence. Jack's death was a direct result of my actions, but not before I coerced his daughter into disposing of his body to avoid legal repercussions. Jack's daughter remained captive until 2022, when she managed to escape and alert the authorities, exposing the full extent of my crimes, including additional acts of fraud, murder, and even cannibalism. The trial that followed laid bare the horrors Hannah and I inflicted upon her family, revealing how I forced Hannah to electrocute her own father and coerced her sister-in-law and her husband into committing matricide, before the husband was compelled to strangle his niece under threat of starvation. After 5 years of legal battles and at least 6 confirmed murders, I was sentenced to death by hanging, awaiting execution to this day. The tale of the Pinebrook Phantom is one of a descent into madness, a reminder of the depths to which humanity can sink, and a story I wish had never been mine to tell. In the summer of 2020, in the quiet town of Oakwood nestled in the Colorado mountains, a chilling event unfolded that I'll never forget. My name is Alex, and I was closely connected to the heart of this tragedy. My friends, Sarah Bennett and Lily Ford, disappeared while hiking on the serene trails of Oakwood Forest, and the search that ensued revealed a horror that our small community was unprepared for. On a bright morning in June, Sarah and Lily set out to explore the winding paths of Oakwood Forest, a place we all had grown to love for its peaceful solitude and natural beauty. But when they failed to return by evening, concern quickly turned into a desperate search. It wasn't until the next day, June 15th, that the unimaginable was confirmed. Hikers found Sarah and Lily's bodies near an abandoned railway bridge, a spot known for its scenic view, but now marked by tragedy. I remember the confusion and fear that gripped me when I first heard the news. The authorities were initially baffled, with no clear suspects in mind. Girls had taken pictures on their phone, capturing their smiling faces against the backdrop of the forest's beauty, unaware of the fate that awaited them. The discovery of Lily's cell phone later revealed haunting recordings and a photo of a man believed to be connected to their deaths, adding a layer of mystery and urgency to the investigation. The town of Oakwood was in shock. The media coverage was intense, focusing on the voice recording from Lily's phone that chillingly instructed, "Down the trail," believed to be the last words Sarah and Lily heard from their assailant. Despite this evidence, the man in the photo was released by the police due to insufficient evidence to hold him. As the days turned into weeks, the police received over 18,000 tips, but the flow of information seemed only to muddy the waters further. On July 17th, a composite sketch of the suspect was released, described as a white male with reddish-brown hair, standing between 5 or 6 inches and 5'10", and weighing between 180 to 220 pounds. Prime suspect, identified only as Michael D., a registered sex offender in Colorado, was arrested in September 2020 in Aspen Grove Park. In January 2021, Michael was sentenced to 3 years for unrelated charges of threatening hikers in Aspen Grove, but remained a person of interest in the Oakwood Forest murders. Despite the overwhelming attention and investigation efforts, the police announced in early February 2021 that Michael D. was not connected to the murders of Sarah and Lily, and the case remains unsolved to this day. The mystery of what happened on the trails of Oakwood Forest that summer haunts me, leaving a shadow over our once peaceful community. When we hear the word Wonderland, we immediately think of Alice who fell into the rabbit hole to reach a fantastical realm. But that's just a fairy tale. In the real Wonderland, a crime occurred decades ago that remains unsolved to this day, despite 2 people being tried and acquitted by the court. The Wonderland I'm talking about is on Wonderland Avenue in Laurel Valley, specifically in a heavily guarded home in the western sector, home to some of Los Angeles' elite, precisely at house number 8763, which was occupied by one of the top drug dealers, also became the scene of a quadruple murder. Specifically, on July 1st, 1981, 4 blood-soaked bodies were found in that house in a horrifying scene reminiscent of the Manson family murders in California. The house at 8763 had been rented by Joy Miller, member of a cocaine drug trafficking gang active in the 1970s, to hide her trade. Living with her in the house were her boyfriend Billy Deverell, Ron Launius and his wife Susan, and over the years, other gang members, including John Holmes, who worked as a pornographic film photographer and frequently visited the house to buy cocaine. The gang primarily earned money from selling drugs, especially cocaine, and occasionally heroin, before turning to armed robbery to cover their expenses, a decision that ultimately led to their bloody end. On June 29th, days before their murder, the gang robbed the home of the famous nightclub owner and gang leader Eddie Nash, with Launius, Deverell, David Lind, and Tracy McCourt among those who robbed the house. During the robbery, they shot Nash's personal bodyguard but didn't kill him, causing a mess in the house but managed to leave without being identified. Although the police didn't identify any suspects, Nash himself pinpointed a group of suspects, including John Holmes, who had visited his house that morning to buy drugs. Nash was convinced Holmes was involved in the crime and might have obtained the attackers' names from his injured bodyguard. Just 2 days after this attack on Nash's house, the robbers were brutally murdered in their home. At 4 p.m. on July 1st, the police received a call from a furniture mover working in the neighboring house, who was terrified. Upon the police's arrival, they found Barbara, David Lynn's girlfriend, lying in front of the couch, swimming in a pool of blood. Miller was dead on her bed, and Deverell's body was torn apart near the television, with a hammer on Miller's bed believed to be one of the murder weapons alongside a collection of metal pipes. Launius was also dead, his body bearing signs of severe beating and covered in blood. The most bloodied scene was of Susan, Launius's wife, covered in blood next to her husband's body, her skull smashed. Yet she was still alive despite the severe brain damage causing her permanent memory loss, rendering her unable to remember anything about the attack. The police searched the house and questioned neighbors who admitted they heard screaming at the time of the crime, but assumed they were hosting a party due to the house's noisy reputation. Almost all the house's walls were covered in blood. The police found some items stolen from Nash's house during their search. The main suspect in the crime was also accused along with John Holmes after his fingerprints were found in the house, but both were acquitted by the court, and no one has been charged with the crime to this day. I still watch him, parked across the street in my car. The lust for revenge feels like a companion sitting beside me, also watching intently. I can't remember when or where the diabolical idea first struck me. The masks. Today, I'll confront him with it. I ponder. What's the risk of dealing with a hired killer? It doesn't matter. I've moved beyond the questioning stage. There's no turning back now. I want to kill that scum myself. I want to see the terror in his eyes. The hired killer steps out of his cafe. I ready my camera and start snapping pictures. The number of hired killers in the city is small, a result of a massacre years ago due to poor coordination. It said the police had hired someone to set them up, trapping them in the very snare they used on their victims. This has saved me a lot of time. For days, I've been bringing my camera to capture everyone entering and leaving that cafe. Everyone knows that's where the hired killers regroup after the massacre. One killer seemed astonishingly suitable. I examine his photo in my dark room meticulously, then whisper, "Your skeletal prominence won't be an issue. Your height is just right. If it weren't for me, I'd say you were me. Thank you for not being bald. We would have needed a wig." I agree on everything with him. It's the deal of a lifetime for the hired killer, especially since he won't actually be doing any killing. All he has to do is wear a leather face mask, a mask resembling the face of the man who hired him. Then, on that night, he's to go to a cafe at the city's edge and cause a scene, giving the hiring man an alibi with the police. The hiring man, me, would do all the work. It was a strange arrangement. I put on my mask too. I was wearing two faces. Given that my mask was a duplicate of the hired killer's, an exact replica of his face, I made sure a small but noticeable scar was visible under the eye. I padded my exterior with some clothes to appear slightly overweight. Standing in front of the hired killer, we were two identical copies, save for the slight obesity and the scar. Same mask, same features, same height. The sight was eerily bizarre. We each took our cars to our destinations. I arrived at the victim's house, asking to see him. Since the maid recognized me as one of her employer's associates, she let me into the waiting room. I feigned having a sore throat that prevented me from speaking normally, ensuring the maid saw the scar. I mentioned something about obesity and its issues before she led me to the master's office, then left. It only took a few minutes to achieve the terror I sought. 2 shots to the heart from my silenced pistol were enough. I preferred not to aim for the head. The ensuing blood would have spoiled my pleasure in seeing the victim's eyes widen in fear. I left quietly, in a perfect spot for the police to search. I discarded my mask in a bin that wouldn't be emptied until the end of the week. Everything was executed with precision. Everything went exactly as planned. I was accused of the crime, but the scar on the mask, along with my alibi, left no doubt that someone tried to frame me due to personal disputes with the deceased. It would have been the perfect crime had the victim not also been wearing a mask when buried 2 days later. I never imagined that my visit to Elmwood, that quiet town in southwest Iowa, would turn into a nightmare I relive every waking moment. I arrived on the evening of June 9th, 1912, to spend some time with my dearest friends, the Harper family, unaware it would be the last time I'd see them. Josiah and Sarah, the wonderful couple, and their 4 children, Herman, Mary, Arthur, and Paul, epitomized happiness and tranquility. That night, Mary had invited Ina and Lena Stillinger to spend the night, adding more joy to their home. After the Children's Day program at the church, organized by Sarah with love and care, we all returned home. The atmosphere was warm and familiar, but after that night, eternal darkness fell upon Elmwood. The next morning, deep concern washed over me when I didn't see the Harpers going about their morning routines as usual. With Beckham knocking on their door with no response, my heart raced. I called Ross Harper, Josiah's brother, and together, we entered the house to discover the tragedy. In the guest room, we found the bodies of Ina and Lena. The horror that had unfolded in that house was unimaginable. My dear friends, the entire Harper family, were gone under the most gruesome circumstances. Hank Horton, Elmwood's first peace officer, arrived swiftly after being summoned. As I stood there, paralyzed with shock, he began to inspect the house. Each room revealed a scene more horrifying than the last. Every victim, friends I considered family, had been brutally beaten to death, their wounds telling a tale of unimaginable violence. The axe, belonging to Josiah, was left there as a silent witness to the atrocities committed. Investigators concluded that the crimes occurred in the early hours of the morning. Hearing them discuss the evidence, I felt the world spinning around me. It was unbearable to think that someone had sneaked into the home, waited in the darkness until my beloved family fell asleep, and then started their murderous journey from room to room. There was a particularly cruel aspect to the idea that Lena, young and innocent, might have been awake in her final moments, trying to defend herself. This part of the story haunts me, knowing she felt extreme fear and pain. As days passed and investigations continued, suspects' names began to surface, each with their story and potential motives. Yet, with every trial and investigation, the crime remained unsolved, and the murderer at large. There was a feeling of helplessness and anger, knowing that justice had not yet been served for my friends, the Harper family, who were loved and known in our community. This crime left a deep scar on Elmwood's heart and mine. Over time, I find myself wondering about the nights spent at the Harpers, about the laughter and beautiful moments we shared. Was there something we could have done differently? Could they have been saved? But the questions remain unanswered, lost in the echoes of time, leaving behind an indelible pain. Despite the years, the memory of that night stays vivid in my mind, as if it happened yesterday. The pain and sorrow are renewed with each morning, reminding me of the void left by that tragedy. I now live near Elmwood, and sometimes I pass by the Harper house, which has become a reminder of life's cruelty and mystery. Every corner of this town carries a memory of a family once full of life and hope. The streets where we played, the church where we gathered, everything now carries the echo of their lost voices. Sometimes, on quiet summer nights, I think I hear the echo of children's laughter resonating through the trees, as if they are still here, playing and running carefree. But reality brings me back to the harsh truth, to the loss and absence